The author's book is for sale thanks to our independent bookstore partner, Eagle Eye Bookshop. We thank Eagle Eye for their support. A portion of the proceeds of their sales at these author events does come back to the library, and we urge you to support them. The proceeds of tonight's silent auction will benefit the Friends of the Gwinnett County Public Library and help support future programs such as this one. This program is being filmed and will be available to be viewed on the library's YouTube channel in a few weeks. Dr. Rita Roberts is the Nathaniel Wright Stevenson Chair in History and Biography at Scripps College and retiring professor of History and African Studies at the Claremont Colleges. She is the author of I Can't Wait to Call You My Wife, African American Letters of Love, Marriage, and Family in the Civil War Era, and Evangelism and the Politics of Reform in Northern Black Thought, 1776 to 1863. Currently, Dr. Roberts is tracing how a Southern family, free Black family, navigated the racial tensions from the early 17th century into the period of Reconstruction. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Roberts to the stage.
Thank you all for coming. It's so nice to see you. I recognize some faces, and it's great to have you to be with me. Thank you, Amy and her staff and the Friends of the Library. I love Friends of any library and Friends of any school. They're so important, especially in this time when we don't give enough for our schools and our libraries. So thank you for coming again. So I thought I'd begin with, I need a podium, but I'm trying to figure out how I can get a podium here. This one doesn't work. So I thought I would begin with just talking a little bit about how I decided to write this book. When I was teaching in Claremont colleges in Southern California, I was often asked to give a talk about African American history. And I would be called by the NACW, National Association of Colored Women, or a fraternity or a sorority or the local Claremont Congregational Church, usually around, guess what month? February. And so obviously you cannot tell all about African American history in 30 to 40 minutes. So I began to find a way to engage the audience and sort of teach them, because we don't know enough about our history. We don't know enough about African American history especially, and I really wanted to have it as a way to teach, but also to make it engaging, because I would be talking to people from all walks of life, professionals. I was invited by a group of the Boulay, mostly attorneys, mostly doctors, so on. You know, so you've got a lot of professionals, and you've got a lot of people in various vocations. So I wanted to be able to appeal to everyone. So I did what I do when I teach a class. I use letters. I use documents. I use treaties, primary sources. So I began doing this early on, soon after I got my PhD from University of California at Berkeley, when I started teaching. And I found that even more than my students' response, my students, pretty good, you know, but they're a little jaded by the time they get in college. You all know this. My audiences who were not college students were enthralled. They were intrigued. They were amazed, had never heard much of what I was telling them. And as I had them read the letters, some of them wept, they cried. Because obviously I would select letters that would pull them in, right? And people kept telling me, is there a book? Where do I go? How do I find out all of this? And of course there are books, there are textbooks. My colleagues and I write a bunch of books, but we talk to ourselves, unfortunately. We don't write for the general public. And so I thought, okay, I'm in the middle of another project, but I'm going to write a quick book. I'm going to include a bunch of letters, and I'm going to put a put it into context, introduce each letter. Take me less than 5 years. Thought it'd be an easy project. This was 2012. Got a grant. Well, little did I know that it takes much longer. I had to collect the letters. I went to archives, went to Massachusetts Historical Society. I went to a private collection in Savannah, Georgia. I was in California. Went to the National Archives in Washington, D.C., the Moreland Spingard in Howard University. Wonderful, wonderful place to sit and study. So that took time. In the meantime, I'm teaching full-time. I'm an administrator of the Mellon program for undergraduates. And I'm also an advisor, chair of history department at times. You know, this is in and outs. I'm doing all the usual things and also trying to do this book. So I decided the book would be about the Civil War era. The Civil War era intrigues me. It still intrigues me. I think it intrigues many of Americans, and a lot of us are talking about the Civil War now. What happens when people come to a sort of no compromise? What happens? Well, what happened in the 19th century is we had a war. And there was no institution at that time that could sort of help to resolve the issue. The political institutions, the religious institutions, all the social institutions, education, all divided, all polarized. So it intrigues me. What happens, you know, what happens in the mind of people in a community when you unite, and then you divide? So the Civil War intrigues me, and it intrigues a lot of us. I know that. And of course, I'm a 19th century US historian, and my specialty is African American history, so it just made sense that I would write a book about African Americans' experience in the Civil War era. So again, I thought this was going to be quick. Research quick. I knew a lot about where letters were. Talked to my colleagues. I'm doing this. Do you know about a good letter here and there? And colleagues talk to each other. We kind of give tips. And, you know, I had colleagues said, I know about this private collection in Savannah. You should call him. My husband and I went there. I wasn't too sure about going to someone's private home, you know, and working, you know. I'm a female. You ever know. My husband went with me, fortunately, and it turned out to be wonderful, most wonderful experience. So I kind of thought this was, again, going to be a very quick kind of experience, and I'd be done in less than 5 years. And I knew that I could synthesize both my work and the work of other scholars. I'd read most of their material anyway. I knew where to go. I just knew this was going to be a real quick and easy project. And yet it was something that was really driving me. I really wanted to do it. So 10 years later, 2012, during COVID hit, archives closed. I had learned a whole lot about what it takes to get a book published by a non-university press. I had not worked with a commercial press, but I wanted this book to be published by a commercial press. A press that would allow me to include lots of images, include the letters, and university presses don't have a lot of money. And they're not interested in that. They're not interested in a book for the general public, generally. They're, you know, it's okay, but. So going to a commercial press, I thought, oh, okay, so I will work with a commercial press. Turns out, I should have known, you have to have an agent. Okay, so I thought, well, you know, in the meantime, I'm writing away. I've got about 500 pages, almost 600 pages, and I'm busy writing away and teaching and, you know, directing programs and all of this. And I'm still sending my work, getting rejections. Great book, but it's a scholarly book. I didn't think it was a scholarly book. I didn't think my colleagues would agree with me that it was a scholarly book. And I began getting a bit frustrated. And then I had to find an agent. Agents are just not easy to find. You can go online, you get colleagues to recommend. Again, it's too scholarly. Okay, to me it was not scholarly. There were some university presses interested, but that should have said to me, okay, you need to make it more appealing to the general public. And so after COVID hit, I had thought, okay, I am going to have to use the letters that I have. And I managed to find quite a few letters that were digitized through the Library of Congress. Lots of images. You have to find images. You have to get permission. You can't just use somebody's image. Library of Congress, fortunately, for the most part, you can use their images. But other images you have to pay for. Fortunately, I have a chair. There's research money, so that helped a lot. So I finally found, I think, the most supportive literary agent in the world. I love her. She's wonderful. New York City, of course, they're all in New York City, it seems. And she was so supportive. COVID had hit, though, and she, like another press, a university press, had somehow mislaid my manuscript for several months because COVID hit. Things got crazy. Our lives just changed dramatically. So she called me up. I hope you haven't signed with anyone. It was around August, I think. Was it 2020? Yeah. And I said, no, I haven't signed with anyone. She said, oh, good, because I love your book. She has this deep, heavy voice. I love your book, Rita. I said, oh, God, thank you. Thank you. And so she began telling me why she loved my book. And I thought, okay, this is the person for me. This is the person I really hope will read it again and agree to sign. And we ended up developing a wonderful relationship. She's a wonderful literary agent. And then she started sending my over 500-page manuscript out to presses, commercial presses. I couldn't do this. An agent has to do it. You cannot just approach a commercial press on your own. They throw it away. They have no interest. If you don't have an agent, good luck. You're not going to get published. So fortunately, I had this agent, and she's well known in New York. So then I think it was around in May 2021. So many people were sort of rejecting. She was calling me and saying they were interested, but they want to talk to you more. Would you be willing to do this? And I really, like most writers, it's my work, and I want it to reflect who I am and not somebody else's, vision. And my agent had the same vision. We shared the same vision, but not clear that, the press might have this same vision. So I had to find somebody who would let me do what I wanted to do. And so this was taking a while. And so I finally said, around May 2021, I thought, maybe I should cut the book in half. Cut it in half. Okay, made sense. So I told my agent, she said, I heard this kind of pause. Are you sure? I said, I really think so. Because the book originally was going to be public and private letters. So I still have all the public. So it was going to be 6 chapters, over 500 pages. And, I talked about what Black people were writing about the Civil War, about slavery to one another. And to me, I always want to know what's in the minds of people, what's going on. One of the things that frustrated me in graduate school was that in studying African American history, it was always what was happening to us and not what we were doing. And it really frustrated me. And where's my voice? Where's our voice? And I kept saying that. And so the public part was going to demonstrate what Black people were thinking about the war, about Abraham Lincoln, and so on. I was able to squeeze a few in the private letters. And so I just cut it. And my agent said, okay, Rita, if you are sure, and she just kept pausing, and I kept thinking, she doesn't think this is a good idea. I think this is the message I'm getting, but she's not saying that. And so I kept thinking, okay. And so I said to her, I really think it will work. And I explained to her, I will focus just on the private letters. I will focus on the theme of the book, which is family. And that was true in the public and the private. I will focus on family, and I will develop it as a book that's shorter and I think more appealing to the presses. She said, okay, let's try it. And it worked. It worked. So even though I had cut out the public letters, I always knew the title of the book. I knew the title of the book in 2012. I was sitting at the Massachusetts Historical Society archives, and I was reading John Washington's letter to Annie Gordon, his fiancée, October 1861. The war starts, as you all know, in April of 1861. And that title, he says to Annie, basically, I can't wait to call you my wife. I said, this has got to be the title of the book. This is it. And I had this epiphany, and I was just wanting to look at everybody who's sitting around telling them I just found the title of my book. And of course, no one's interested. Their heads are down and more concerned about, of course, their own research project. But the title, to me, is not only a wonderful and endearing title of a young man in his, 20, declaring his love for his fiancée. She's free, he's enslaved, he's a hired out slave. But it resonates with and reflects so much of African American experience. I can't wait to call you my wife. So when we understand what that means for an enslaved population, we have to think about the degree to which slavery essentially is about the ownership of one human being or one institution. Colleges, universities own slaves. One institution, one family owning another human being. We have to understand what the essence of slavery is. So the American legal system ensured that slaves were more property than human. They were commodities. They could be bought, they could be sold. American slavery was not only racial slavery, it also meant kinlessness. We have to think about that. Individuals who were enslaved had no formal power over themselves or their children, their wives, their husbands. They were kinless in law. They had no right to protect their children, a father, mother. They had no right to protect their wives. And many times slaveholders were forced enslaved people to watch a child being beaten to let them know who had the power, who had the real power. Slave codes in every state and throughout the colonies, you know, all 13 colonies had slaves. You should know that. Throughout the colonies, forbid the legitimization of marital bonds. Why do you think that is? Why do you think they couldn't get married? Marriage is a contract. Anybody want to take a guess? So that it would not interfere with the slaveholder's interest in selling or trading, auctioning, or whatever. Property was more important than human relationships in the slave system. They could be auctioned, they could be inherited. If you have a marriage contract, then that contract allows you to have certain voice. You don't have voice in slavery. So it was intended not to interfere with the profit of the slaveholding institution of the slaveholder, companies, colleges, universities, anyone involved in the system. And I should say that slavery was economically profitable, not just to slaveholders, not just to the South, but throughout the country. The best asset to invest in, New York investors knew this well, was to, even investing in railroads, invest in slaves, far more profitable. And by the 1850s, the antebellum period, just before the Civil War, enslaved people were so valuable that they were in the thousands, especially for a male. So if you want a quick increase in your profit, you invest in slavery. And that's what people did all over the country. So we need to be clear about who's complicit in this. Insurance companies, banks, and so on. Of course, slave traders. But guess who insured the slaves, right? So we need to understand what slavery is. So the reason individuals couldn't get married was because there was no intention of interfering with this incredibly profitable system. So again, when John Washington declares that he wants someone to call wife, it has a dual meaning. It resonates. He wants someone to call wife legitimately. And in that sense, he's challenging a system that denies the legitimization of family, of Black families. And in this way, he reflects the values, the goals, the interests of most enslaved people. And most people of African descent were enslaved. By 1860, over 4 million people are enslaved in this country. So the letters show, and this is what I hope you're getting out of the letters, is that African Americans consistently rejected the notion of dehumanization, rejected the notion that they were more property than human. And I want to stress dehumanization because I hear young people in high school saying, oh, Black people were dehumanized. The system, yes, made them more property than human. The laws supported that, the courts supported that, but Black people themselves who were enslaved were not dehumanized. In fact, marriage and family is one of the ways that in which they showed how much they were part of the human community. So the letters show that African Americans consistently rejected the fundamental nature of the slave system, a system that made them commodities, that tried to deny them the basic, most basic, universal human expression of family, expressing love, courting, making community. And so they did this. In spite of the illegality of it, you might say, they engaged in marriage, wasn't legitimized, they had family. They courted, formed communities without legal sanction, thus challenging the notion that they were more property than human. And that's why when I teach in college, my students would say, I know slaves are all dehumanized, and I would just, you sit there. And we had long conversations. the system was dehumanizing, enslaved people were not. They challenged it consistently in a million ways. But my book talks about family, this most universal expression. So I thought I might stop for a minute and allow for some questions, and then I'll show some slides and we'll talk about the letters. Yes.
So this is actually kind of going back to you're talking about going to the private collector in Savannah. I've donated one thing in my life to a museum because it was something shameful from maybe my family's history,
Yeah.
maybe something given to a family member, not certain. Did deal with KKK. After my grandma passed, I found it. I didn't want to throw it away because I thought it was important to keep that history.
Sure,
But I did
absolutely.
at home, so I did donate it to a museum. But do you have any thoughts on like private collections and things, especially of that ilk, that are, I guess, taboo in today's society, but still, like in my case, I felt like it did need to be in some way preserved just for the historical context of it?
Absolutely, absolutely. I have a book in my library, and I turned the back cover. I can't stand the book, but it's just sheer disgusting racial ideology. It's horrible. It's written by a scholar, and it's awful. It's in my library, and I will donate it because it's part of who we are as a people. If we don't understand our past, James Baldwin said this far better than me, and I wish I could remember his exact words. If we don't know who we are, if we don't know where we've been, we don't know where we're going. So we need to preserve. We need to put it in an archive, give it to a library. Yes, absolutely. And it is hard. I had a student who told me at one point I can't remember the class I was teaching, but she used to wear KKK earrings because her grandfather was a Grand Wizard. And she grew up, can't remember, Kentucky somewhere, and she was just weeping and trying to deal with all the stuff she'd grown up with. It's tough, but that's what it means to mature and sort of grow intellectually, is to challenge and begin thinking and sharing stuff. And so if you just threw it away or burned it, which is what a lot of people do, I think it really takes away from what we need to know more about who we are. We are all, in a sense, part of this project of learning more about who we are and trying to unlearn much of the past. Thank you. Anyone else have question, comment before I move on? Yes.
You mentioned marriage and family was illegal, but they still, despite that, wanted to maintain those relationships. How did they go about doing that?
That was the hardest part, right? So I'm going to talk more about that when I begin showing the slides. But they bargained with the slaveholder. Slaveholders tended not to want enslaved couples to be on the same plantation. They called them abroad marriages. They wanted them to marry someone on another plantation. And why, do you think? Does anyone want to comment on why you think that would be? The better to control the wife, the children. The children usually went with the mother. And so they didn't want that conflict, because fathers tended to try to protect their wives and their children. So they didn't want that conflict. So what enslaved people often did was to try to bargain with the slaveholder. I'll work for you, I'll do even more, I'll do whatever. You just keep my child and don't sell my child. And there are horrific stories, and I hate to tell you, but there are individuals who literally made themselves invaluable so they wouldn't be sold. Would not be. Chop off their hand. It can get graphic and gory, which is again a testament of the importance of family. They try, but generally not successful, but they do their best. And so the relationships, we'll talk about whoops. Emily Sanders Plummer and Adam, amazing couple. This couple, to me, are just fascinating. And I feature them from the beginning, the antebellum period, during the war, and then the post-Civil War. This image is probably of them in the 1870s. But this couple is fortunate and unique in many ways. They are able mostly to stay together. And those of you who have read the book know Emily and Adam Plummer's experience. Emily and Adam never actually lived on the same plantation for the reasons we just talked about. But they lived close enough at first so that Adam could go and see Emily and then the children, forthcoming children. At one point, Emily writes to Adam because she's been moved further away. Her slaveholder, an older woman, gets ill and then she dies. The death of a slaveholder almost always means sale and auction and division of family. So Emily is worried. She writes to Adam. Now, Emily is actually illiterate, so she has someone write for her. Adam is barely literate, I have to tell you. If you read his diary, it's almost impossible to decipher, but his daughter cleaned up the diary, a school teacher herself, later in the late 19th century, so I relied on that one. It's easier to read. But both of them consistently try to maintain their family in a way that it seems almost impossible. So Emily has moved away. The children are mostly with her. One is, though, kept. I think he's only 5 years old at first. He's kept by another slaveholder. He's closer to the father. The father, Adam, is so fortunate, if you can call it that, to be a slave and be fortunate. How does that work? That's an oxymoron. But Adam has a slaveholder who is financially stable. He's part of the Calvert family, you know, the Maryland family. And he has so much financial stability that Adam is not threatened with sale. Not only that, but Adam, and this could be part of connected to your question about how do you maintain your family, Adam must have worked really hard to gain the favor of his slaveholder. His slaveholder not only let him cultivate and plant trees on about 3 or 4 acres, he grew peaches and all kinds of fruit and vegetables and let him sell them and benefit from the sale, which means his slaveholder was pretty wealthy, right? Very few are that wealthy. And he also lets him go visit Emily and the children. At one point, Adam and Emily are so far away that he has to even take a train, still in Maryland, but a train to visit Emily and the children. And so if we just look at one of their letters, this is not Emily writing it. The last letter, it seems like Emily actually wrote the letter. I really think she wrote the last letter, but this is one of the first letters. This is after they're separated the first time. And Emily is responding to what Adam must have said was that, oh, the troubles are so bad, I don't know if we'll ever see each other again, because she was being sold away. And one of their biggest fears was that they would be sold away. In fact, they had tried to escape to the north, or maybe Canada, when they only had 2 children, and one of her relatives informed on them. So Adam must have expressed his depression, his sadness at some point and said, I don't know if we'll ever see each other again, I don't know. But Emily is thinking, I want you to let me know why you wrote me so troubled a letter. I'm sorry to hear you say that you and I are parted for life. And I'm very troubled by it. Then she says, your affectionate wife, Emily. Adam responds. Now you have to remember, Adam is learning, gaining literacy. My dear wife, the same day in the morning, he's basically saying, when you sent the letter, in my heart, I was just saying, I wish I could see you. And then a little boy came and he brought the letter to me. And I have a joyful heart. I hold it with open hands. You are mistaken that I do not wish to be here for you and the children, is basically what he's saying there. These letters continue from the antebellum period all the way until they're finally reunited during the war, and then Adam builds a home and in Maryland, and has great pride that he's able to provide a home for his family when they're all finally united. And those of you who have read the letter know that their oldest daughter is sold to the South, and they go through great grief about that. They're an amazing couple. But again, this is the evidence that I have that family is central, that African Americans reject this notion that they are more commodity than human, and they constantly express, this couple is especially, constantly express their love for one another. Dangerfield Newby, an entirely different experience. It's so important for us to understand the African American experience is not a monolith. The experiences are complex, diverse, depending upon the region of the country, north, south, depending upon the eastern seacoast versus being in Mississippi or Texas, whether one's enslaved on in a cotton field in Texas or Mississippi, or even in Georgia. The experiences are different. Depends upon the size of the slaveholding, how much money the slaveholder has, right? All of that. Really incredibly diverse experiences. We need to understand that. There's no one-dimensionality of African American experience. Dangerfield Newby's father was a slaveholder who was white. So Dangerfield Newby moves with his dad, slaveholder dad, and his mom, who was a slave, and they moved to Ohio. The father decides to take his children and the woman he loved. I assume they married, and they moved to Ohio. Newby is married. He's got children. He's married to Harriet. Harriet can't go. So Dangerfield's plan is that he's going to buy his wife and his children out of slavery. People do this. Richard Allen did it in the late 18th century. Those of you who know who Richard Allen is. Richard Allen was a minister enslaved in Delaware, went to Philadelphia and started the African Methodist Episcopal Church, just to remind some of you, okay? So he thought he would be able to buy his wife and his children out of slavery. He worked very hard to do so. He couldn't raise enough money. And part of the problem is that in the 1850s, the price of enslaved people just kept going up, even for women. Not that women didn't work as hard in the fields as men, but they were valued less. So to buy his wife and to buy his children became impossible. He had raised over $700, but it's not enough. Not in that time. So Harriet begins writing to Dangerfield and saying, basically, you really need to purchase me. Lots of letters of wives writing to their husbands, writing to their mothers, women writing, young daughters writing to their mothers, writing to their fathers, please purchase me. mothers maybe in the north working as washerwomen or whatever, please come and get me. Those of you who have read Emily Russell's letter know Emily Russell writes to her mother, Nancy Cartwright, and says, please come by me. I'm in the auction house, and I know I'm going to be sent to the Deep South. So these letters are common. So Harriet is trying, and they write back and forth, and he keeps telling her how much he loves her, that he's raising the money, he's going to try and purchase her. He doesn't raise enough money. He finally gives up. He joins John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry, and he's killed. Harriet's letters are found on his body. Again, the testament of incredible love, incredible sacrifice to be with one another. And then we see evidence of a love between father and daughter. That's Frederick Douglass and Annie Douglass in the North. Her letter to her father, Annie's letter to her dad, is kind of a different kind of familial love. Evident to Annie that her dad loves her, even as she brags about doing better than the German kids in the German class. I don't know, does anybody have a book in front of them? Can you read that letter for us? It'd be great if somebody would read it for us. Lisa's thinking about it. Okay, let's see, what page is it on? 94. Lisa's going to read it for us. It's a great letter. Thank you, Lisa.
December 7th, 1855. My dear Father, I'm proceeding in my German very well, for my teacher said such. I am in the first reader, and I can read. I expected you will have a German letter from me in a very short time. I've learned another piece, and it is about slavery. I'm going to speak in school. My piece is this. This is not the man for me, who buys or sells a slave, for he will not set him free, but send him to his grave. But he whose noble heart beats warm for all men's life and liberty, who loves alike each human form, that's the man for me. It is in the garland of freedom, and 4 verses of it. My letter will not be very long. Poor Mr. Brown is dead. That hard-hearted man said he must die, and they took him in an open field about a half-mile from the jail and hung him. The German children like me very much, but I have gone ahead of them, and they have been there longer than me too. They all send their love. From your affectionate daughter, Annie Douglas.
Thank you, Lisa. She knows her dad cares about her. Her dad is in Britain, Great Britain. He's escaped to Great Britain because he's afraid he will get caught up in the retribution of the John Brown raid at Harper's Ferry. Several abolitionists just fled because they were afraid that they would be arrested and be considered part of the conspiracy to start a slave insurrection through John Brown. Frederick Douglass had told John Brown, this is a foolish idea. You have no idea how slavery is protected in Virginia. But, you know, John Brown, being from New England and had been to Kansas, but really didn't understand the way in which slavery was protected. And of course, we all know what happened, that John Brown was executed. So in contrast to Annie Douglas's letter to her dad, thank you, Lisa, again, and to Harriet Newby's letter, and to Emily and Adam Plummer, we have a letter written by Germaine Logan, who is an abolitionist, fugitive slave, escaped to New York, now had a church in Syracuse, New York, very much part of the Underground Railroad. He and Frederick Douglass were good friends, and he gets a letter from his slaveholder. February 20th, 1860. She has no idea that the war is going to start within a year. Sarah Logue writes to Jermaine Logan, "To harm," and I won't read the whole letter. "I want to let you know how we all are. I write you these lines to let you know the situation we are in. Partly in consequence of your running away and stealing Old Rock, our fine mare. Though we got the mare back, she never was worth much after you took her, and as I now stand in need of some funds, I'm determined to sell you. And I have had an offer for you, but did not see fit to take it. If you will send me $1,000 and pay for the old mare, I will give up all claim I have to you. Write to me as soon as you get these lines and let me know if you will accept my proposition. In consequence of your running away, we had to sell Abe and Ann and 12 acres of land. And I want you to send me the money that I may be able to redeem the land that you was the cause of our selling, and on receipt of the above named sum of money." Beyond arrogance. Let's just admit it. Incredible. Jermaine Logan, Reverend James Logan, writes back. Syracuse, New York, March 28th, 1860. Mrs. Sarah Logue, yours of the 20th of February is duly received, and I thank you for it. Excerpt. "You are a woman, but had you a woman's heart, you would never have insulted a brother by telling him you sold his only remaining brother and sister because he put himself beyond your power to convert him to money." And then he goes on. This is an amazing letter, a must read, really. So Jermaine Logan demonstrates that African Americans constantly condemned. He's not the only fugitive slave who got letters from their slaveholders telling them to send them money. Frederick Douglass gets this as well. But he's basically condemning her for a lack of respect for African American family. In essence, that's what he's saying. Jermaine Logan says, "So when the war came, we really begin to see the evidence of how central family is to African American in this period. The centrality of family is really overwhelming. Enslaved families take advantage, beginning 1861, of the wartime disruption, and they flee to Union lines as families, as best they could. Older people, young people flee to Union lines. And they begin the process that is so critical for understanding African American family experience of looking for family members who had been sold away. During the war, we have record after record from the Freedmen's Bureau telling of individual mothers, fathers, children going from refugee camp to refugee camp looking for their loved ones. And like couples everywhere, courtship, marriage was a part of this period. Couples get married during war. And this is John's letter to Annie. This is the one that gave me the title of the book. He declares his love for Annie Gordon. And then when the Union Army begins recruiting black troops in 1863, black soldiers are gaining literacy. They spend their time in camp learning how to read and write, those who didn't. Although we know about 5 to 10% of the enslaved population had some degree of literacy. We now know this. But those who didn't learned how to read and write. Many of them did. And their wives, many times in refugee camps, were learning to read and write from the many teachers, like Mary Peak, Southern teacher who had been teaching secretly in Virginia, now could teach openly during the Civil War to the refugees. Isn't she beautiful? And people got married, declared their love. This is Rufus and Elizabeth Turner's marriage certificate. And they married legally. And then there were others who engaged in very long courtships. I followed them from the beginning, antebellum, all the way to the post-Civil War era, and they began declaring their love. And Lewis's letters to Amelia, I mean, I don't know a woman who wouldn't want to hear the words of love that he expresses for her. I mean, I shall always love you, never give me up for dead until you are certain of it. Another time he just says to her, I love you because I love you. And it's just amazing. And she's sort of playing it cool. Eventually, they are able to get together. They finally marry in 1869. Lewis has, in between, become a soldier, 54th Massachusetts Colored Infantry. He is wounded severely. He spends a lot of time in the hospital. The doctor tells the family that he will never be able to produce children. And I think that's probably why it takes them a while to get married. Amelia has to come to terms with having a childless marriage. So thank you. It's the end of my time. And I hope there are questions. If you have questions, comments, let me know. Maybe you have a particular letter you would like to talk about if you've read the book. Okay, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much, Dr. Roberts. I've always been told that I should never stop learning, and I have to say I learned a lot tonight. Love to sit in one of your classes. I'll bet you're a fantastic teacher. Thank you for what you do for being an educator. Thank you all for coming out tonight. I appreciate your attendance. We do have the silent auction. It'll be open for another 5 minutes. Dr. Roberts will be available to sign your books up here at the front table. Just please form a single file line to the extent you can. And if you want your picture taken with the doctor, we can do that also. Thank you all for coming out. Thank you also to the library staff, Amy, Miriam, for putting this on, and for the library system for sponsoring these fantastic programs. Thank you all, and have a safe journey home.